It's fruit fly culture day. I've got to scrub about 24 deli cups, clean, and make 10 new cultures. I've been buying cups, lids, culture media, Excelsior, and even flies from NE Herp for 15 years now. You can do the same by going to neherp.net. You can buy a live culture or two. If you need all the supplies necessary to make a dozen or even 100 cultures, you can save some money because NE Herp has pre-portioned culturing kits at a discount. For me, some of my fabric lids were getting really funky after being washed and reused a few times, so I was able to buy just the replacement lids I needed and a couple bags of media. NE Herp is the sponsor of today's episode of the Frograck Podcast. They have been my first choice for terrarium supplies since they opened their doors in 2009. I keep shopping with NE Herp because Mike and Jessica are hobbyists first. They continue to have first-hand experience building vivariums and providing excellent care for captive herps. They have the best customer service, fast shipping, and a wide selection. I can always find the herp supplies I need at neherp.net. If you keep reptiles or amphibians and you are looking to build the perfect bioactive habitat, NE Herp is your go-to source for terrariums, lighting, live plants, substrates, microfauna, supplements, feeder insect culturing supplies, and more. Like I said, everything you need in one place. Trusted nationwide by hobbyists, dart frog enthusiasts, and zoos, and your favorite Frograck podcaster. NE Herp is your one-stop vivarium shop. So head on over to neherp.net and pick up the supplies you need to support your herp hobby. Thank you, NE Herp, for supporting today's episode of the Frograck Podcast. Welcome to Frogcast, the Frograck Podcast. Today's guest is Brutus, who you might know if you're on social media as Socal Paws N Claws. Welcome, Brutus. How are you?
Hey, no complaints over here. That department's usually never open.
Okay, good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are before we start talking about frogs and newts?
So, Socal Paws N Claws, we strive to breed captive bred animals to a high standard. We try to produce stuff that is kind of hard to find in the hobby or somewhere you have to come just to us. We're trying to work with species that people would it would help with conservation. It would stop people from having to go grab those animals from the wild, or maybe they can't even grab them from the wild at this point, to where the only way they're going to get them is, someone stepping up and doing a nice round of breeding, making sure that there's a surplus of stock. And then what we do is when we're breeding stuff, we're really trying to make sure that our lines are good. So we're always
nice.
Trying to make sure we're not inbreeding, or, I know there's some times where animals where morphs don't necessarily mix together. We're trying to stay away from that and make sure that everything we're doing is quote unquote, ethical and correct.
Nice. Before we go deeper into amphibians, the name Socal Paws N Claws suggests that you work with something other than amphibians. What else are you keeping there?
Yeah, so right now we got some Bengal cats, and
Cool.
That's kind of what is our main project right now. We actually have 3 kittens left. We just had a new litter. My wife is the one who actually is the little mammal lady.
Nice.
I'm the little recluse with the newts and stuff. So that's a different aspect of animals when you go that route. You get a bonding experience, love, affection, and, what we're used to is something completely opposite. We got food motivated animals. So I think the spectrum of what we keep is kind of cool. Gives different aspects of the hobby too, because there's more than just a snake, frog, there's even more than what we have. There's so many people who have different, I don't say just mammals, but there's just so much cool stuff in the world. You can get a crab.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cool. How long have you been keeping amphibians or keeping and breeding amphibians?
So keeping, it's been a while. It's been long journey. But taking it like more seriously, focused on like captive breeding and things of that nature, stimulation of animals and like seasonal, like creating a habitat where you can play God almost and start manifesting what you want. That's probably been like a 5 to 7 year journey. I started with a Leachianus gecko. My I had like fish at that point, and it was just to keep them and look at them, a little aquarium with just rocks in it. But he forced me to hold this lychee, and one thing led to another. I was finding myself at a pet shop trying to find this animal that's not at pet shops. Um, so that also began the journey of, it's kind of fun when you're collecting, searching for all these projects that you can't just walk into Petco and grab. And so building the relations and things like that over the years has been something that has also been like a foundation of what we do here. But when I was young too, I actually had like hermit crabs and things like that. So kind of always interested in those oddball animals. I feel like a lot of us too, we have, when we're young, are looking in animal books like, I want a okapi, I want a platypus, I want this, and just manifesting that as you become an adult. And just like what you got going on back there, the addiction comes.
Yeah, I've had the addiction for a while myself. I coined my screen name as Frograck a long time ago because you don't just get like a frog tank, you get a frog rack at the very least. And never mind the fact that now I'm in a frog room and I also have a newt room. Yeah, I understand the addiction. I also understand whatever, maybe call it a dopamine hit of searching for something rare and finding it. Some people do Pokemon cards. You and I do frogs and newts.
Everybody's got something.
Yep. Cool. So tell me a little bit about newts. You're in Southern California, and that's not the first place I'd think of for like an easy place to keep newts because they like cooler temperatures. So what do you have for newts? How do you keep them?
So I have a newt room. I have one side with the tropical ones. I have one side with my, how a standard newt is, keep it at cooler temps. The challenge with that is what you're referring to is temperatures. Newts do not do well in hot, when we get 90-degree temps here quite often. If you don't have the proper setup, I don't think that you'll find success with it. That's also some of the fun part, is being able to create all that. So what I do is I have a rain bird system, and it reads out what my humidity and temperature, all that good stuff is, and keeps a little log for me. And it's hooked up to an AC. I got a fan going. I have a couple fans going. I feel like air circulation is something that's sometimes overlooked in rooms.
Yeah.
And then, it does get cold here too. So there will occasionally be a time where I use a heater. But my house is insulated, so I find just shutting the window will be more than suffice for winter times. The challenge with the room that's closed, though, is it gets wet in there with so many tanks.
Do you have lids on your tanks?
So they're all screen tops.
Yeah.
I try to make sure that there's good ventilation. I've had projects in the past where, sealed shut, and I've had some issues. So I'm just trying to make sure that, it's close to the wild as possible and no one's in a box. So they got to have their air. But what I find with the room is when I first started, I was actually getting wet drywall. And so I was having to cut stuff out and working to dial in the system a little more so that everything, everything's in tip-top condition. That's basically all the stuff that we use, and it transfers over to the cats too. So those are more tolerable, kittens or not. So we got to have like little warm incubation stations and things like that. But that's more straightforward.
Nice. Do you run dehumidifiers, or what do you do to manage the moisture?
Oh yeah. So I notice if I run one big one, it pulls everything from the whole room. So I have different areas with smaller humidifiers, and some of the humidity will be better on one half of the room than the other. So they'll just kick on periodically. Another important bit of electronics would be an air purifier. These rooms get some rank to them if you let them sit.
From feeder insects or from something else? Just the humidity?
Well, I do all bioactive tanks,
Yep.
so I'm not doing too much water changes. And when I walk in the room, there can be a swamp smell, a Phaloderma, for instance, brown water sitting on wet trees. They're always, splashing. A frog in general has an aroma. When you have 1,000 frogs and all these newts too, you get a fish smell, I believe, and making sure that environment, air purifier will clean the environment too, but also just make it where you can actually hang out in the room and enjoy it.
Right. Yeah, these are things that if you're a relatively new hobbyist and the addiction is setting in, that you're going to learn the hard way. Aquarium people who have a fish room or a fish basement, they're down with the lids on their aquariums and the dehumidifiers running almost constantly because they figured that out the hard way themselves. But yeah, if you're coming from a reptile or amphibian background and you've just imagined, oh, hey, people have fish tanks in their houses all the time, I'm going to put 20 fish tanks in my house. You're going to learn pretty quick that water and humidity becomes a pretty big issue. What air purifier do you use? Because I actually need one for this room.
I grab like multiple different ones, so it's not one brand.
Okay.
But we have this place called Bulldogs out where I live, and I'm not gonna say wholesale store, but it's like this warehouse discount area, and it's open boxes of stuff that's brand new, and I'll go there and swoop up 10 at a time because it's cheaper to do that than it is to replace the filter.
Okay, nice. What species of newt do you enjoy keeping the most?
I feel like Dobrocosis is such a very, it's a common newt.
Yep.
Also rib newts. So those are very personable. You could throw them in a bowl of mud and they're going to do well. So they're very beginner friendly. I have crested newts getting up into the 80s in my water at times. So I think they're one of the hardiest newts. They're so weird looking. They're like a pencil.
Yeah, they're really long.
Yeah, and then a rib newt, on the other hand, is very just morbidly obese, but same kind of idea where they're an active newt. They're not something that's going to sit under a rock the whole time. So if you're just getting into it, I think that would be an amazing starting point for any hobbyist.
Yep. And I mean, you say common, but common's a relative term.
For us nerdy people, you know, but it's still nothing you're going to walk into anywhere and find even when you go to reptile shows, nobody sells newts anymore.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get to this later in the conversation, but if a hobbyist who's passionate about amphibians wants to impact the hobby by captive breeding, you can't go wrong with any newt species because for the last 15 years there's been way more demand than there is supply, because if people don't know, no new imports can come into the United States in an effort to keep a contagious fungal disease out of North America. So what we have is what we have, for better or worse, which is good. It provides a lot of opportunity for captive breeding to feed into the pet trade and to be shared amongst hobbyists. And those newt species you just mentioned, I think they make really good beginner species for people. And they could be, if there was enough supply, they could be in every pet store in America. And pet store staff are perfectly capable of helping people set those up in a good way. But there's just nowhere near the supply of them.
Yeah, it's I would say obscure animals they take a time to catch on. I remember a long period of time an axolotl was a fishing bait.
Right.
They didn't catch on. It took 30 plus years, and the internet will do its thing, People don't get to see this stuff to know that they want it.
Right, yeah.
That's the main problem. And like you're saying, it's scarcity. There's not too many people willing to put in months long to raise an animal. And the stuff we're selling, it's exotic, but it's not $500, so that's where people kind of run into the scarcity part, because it is a decent amount of work. It is something that we're passionate about. It's not something that we're showing up for to be rich, I don't think.
Right.
I could be wrong, but
yeah, I don't know. I've seen some of the price tags of newts, but again, I've been breeding newts for a few years myself, and Despite my best efforts, I can't crank out big numbers of newts. On that topic, what does it take if you're dedicated to one or two newt species, or maybe even more? What does it take to produce saleable juvenile newts?
It takes first producing food for those newts, I think, is the thing that everybody struggles with, to have it on demand as you need, size appropriate, because these things will eat each other.
Yeah.
Found it in all species. I don't know any newt species where the babies hang out and they're just looking to starve with each other. Making sure that if you're not breeding your own food, that you at least have access to live food. And that's the problem, is you can't go buy fish flakes or frozen this and that. They'll accept it after a certain point, but they're
right.
I don't know if it's sentience, but basically their ability to hunt is minimal and they're basically blind. So it's something has to be moving really fast, be really smelly to get their attention.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Newt larvae want live food. They're not like frog tadpoles. They don't eat algae and detritus. They eat live food, and they come out when they hatch out of the egg. They are tiny. I start them off on baby brine shrimp. Do you do the same?
I used to.
Yeah.
I use what is it called? I call it fairy shrimp.
Okay, right.
Fresh water. So I'm not washing it anymore.
Yep.
I will start a batch, grow them to adults, let them lay, and then forever just be changing the water as stuff dies off, and clean it out, rinse it up, and I have eggs all around the side and they'll hatch again.
Cool. Yeah.
So I find that to be easier, or more of like a lazy method, has been working for me outside. I'll grow them in tubs of green water. That's another thing, is you have to have food to feed your food.
Yeah.
Is another tricky thing. So yeah, we'll start with green water, have some shrimp growing in there. Then you get a little fish net or a turkey baster, get them out. And then that stuff, it changes the water so fast that you want to feed at a time when the newts are ready to eat. You don't want to throw in thousands of Daphnia or little shrimps the day before you already fed and there's leftover, because then you'll be having to clean more. As you start doing this, you'll find a balance with how you feed, you clean, and that's all trial and error.
Yep. Yeah, water changes and removing all the detritus from the tank, keeping you got to have the basic knowledge of a cycled aquarium to keep the water in good condition. Do you try to culture Daphnia?
I do. I always have Daphnia, except for winters. Winters, I struggle with Daphnia. I cannot grow it indoors for whatever reason. So when summer ends, I'll still have some to go for like a month or so. I'll let the tub dry out. I'll bring it inside at that point, because Daphnia does not hatch in cold water for me. It's always been warmer, maybe 70s or 80s. After those dry months, I will put the tub back out, fill it up with fresh water, let it turn green, the Daphnia hatches, and then the whole process starts all over again. So that's the same thing for the fairy shrimp too.
Your cultures have to go through a dry cycle for the next generation to hatch?
So yeah, what I've found is in the wild, their eggs will dry up for up to 10 years and wait for a rain so that when a vernal pool appears, they can hatch again. I think in my experience, it's only taken a couple weeks of dry period for that to be necessary. But once they do lay in there, the eggs are so many. There's unusable amounts. So you just need to get that one good breeding session in for the shrimp, and keep that, just like the animals that we have, the cultures will go bad. So you got to be on top of maintaining that, or starting a new one and making sure that there's no excessive die off. Yep.
Yeah, I'll have to try those fairy shrimp. I tried them on a really small scale, like a 10-gallon aquarium of them once, and it wasn't great. So I just stuck with brine shrimp and then Daphnia. In the years that I've been culturing Daphnia, I can't say that I have it down. I did learn that Daphnia some people keep continuous cultures of Daphnia going, either indoors or outdoors. And that's because Daphnia can give birth to live young, or they can lay a cyst, which is an egg that needs to go dormant. And when I've ordered Daphnia off the internet, I've always experienced culture crash after a few months. So I don't know. I just haven't nailed that down. When I've collected Daphnia locally here from vernal pools in New England, they definitely are laying cyst eggs, not live young. So I have to try to dry out, cool off, and then add water to try to get the next generation of Daphnia. And so that is a months long process that requires temperature change. And so it's not very good for keeping regular, steady live food available every single day for 100 baby newts. So yeah, it's been a challenge.
I would always encourage to have, if not one backup culture, a second one going, because there's always a process going on of getting to the next stage. And so if you're working with one culture, I feel like that process becomes harder, because if something goes wrong,
yeah,
you're on you're starting all over from scratch. The one thing with getting local Daphnia or local fairy shrimp from your vernal pools is that's temperature tolerant to your area. So
it is. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, is maybe they would do well outdoors in tubs if I collected them right basically in my backyard. I'm also really scared about disease, so I did have the local university people help me test for chytrid fungus. I wanted to make sure like the local frogs in that pond were not positive for chytrid. I didn't want to bring that into my house since I keep newts and frogs.
I don't know if anybody does.
Yeah, no one does. Thank goodness it's clear here. The wild populations are clear. But I also cannot help but bring in two things: mosquito larvae. No one wants that in their house. And dragonfly larvae. Like, I think they come in as eggs if I do stuff outside, because then I'll notice a big, giant, fat dragonfly larva in one of my newt tanks. I'm like, oh, I wonder how many newts you've eaten before I found you.
So when you put anything outside that's sitting water, that is basically an invitation for a mosquito.
Yep.
The only thing I found that works is triple lining. You window screen, you change the mesh so that it doesn't line up over one another, and you make it so it's breathable. I just cut a hole in I use a lid, a seal tight lid, and cut a hole in that, glue it or silicone it, and then that's your best bet. But nothing's perfect. Those things can fit through anything for whatever reason.
Yeah, it sure seems that way. Yeah. So there you go. There's our advice to new people who want to jump into the newt game: is learn to breed mass quantities of tiny live aquatic organisms, and good luck. And if you figure it out, call us, because we all need help.
True. And then when they get older, you're still going to need to provide some type of, I feel like the staple's blackworms. That's what we all switch to.
When they're bigger, yeah.
Yeah, blackworms. I do white worms too. I've had success with not having to get my hands dirty anymore. There's so much worms that I can just scoop them off the top. Takes a long time to get to that point. Very long time.
I've been experimenting with fruit fly larvae, which...
That's a good one.
Yeah, once you put them in the water, they're going to be dead in about an hour. So you can't overfeed, because you'll ruin your tank and possibly have a die-off. So you got to feed only small amounts, what the newts are going to eat before the larvae drown and die. And I've been adding as much sort of like nutrition. I've been like building up the fruit fly culture media, because it's usually just potato flakes and powdered sugar, and that doesn't really make good nutrition for baby newts. So I've been adding all sorts of different gut loading things to the fruit fly media to try to get the larva really healthy.
Are you making it into like a paste, like a smoothie almost, like blending everything together?
The fruit fly media, yeah. I mix it while it's dry. I mix all the gut loading while it's dry before I add water. But it does cause them to be more prone to mold. So
I've been reading, tips and tricks as far as microbial things that you can add to media. I'll try to send you a link to the one that I watched recently, where the lady's getting 6 weeks out of her cups.
Yep.
I'm tapping out at like 2 or 3. Then I gotta get new ones that get a little
right on.
You get it where it gets really runny.
Yeah, it's done at that point. It's unusable.
It smells good, huh?
Yeah. Cool. So that's some stuff about newts. What frogs? I know you keep a lot of different frogs. What are some of the interesting frogs that you're keeping?
I think the holy grail for a long time was the Crusiohyla craspidopus, the fringed leaf frog, Amazon fringed leaf frog. Those have been a favorite for a while. I have two localities. I have Peruvians and then I have Ecuadorians. Sylvae leaf frog is another cool one that I feel like was really, really rare in the hobby up until recently.
It still kind of is, yeah.
True. I guess when we say rare, there's still, you're not going to find them. And when you do find them, there'll be like 3.
Yeah.
What else? I got lemur leaf frogs. Those were really popular for a long time. Just like we're going to talk about later, that things start disappearing, and going to work with those really hard this year or next year as well, and try to see what I can get out of the water. I just recently got red-eye tree frog morphs that I'm going to start working with from Mike Novi. Very typical frog, but I'm very excited for it, just to have all the different colors. I really like the hot pink ones, the bubblegums.
Really? I like the albino ones. I hate the bubblegum ones. They look gross to me.
Oh yeah, they look like something, but
like raw chicken.
Yeah. I think another thing that I'm really interested in, besides the big frogs, is really small frogs. So I'm getting into glass frogs. I'm attempting to breed Cochranella granulosa right now, the granular glass frog. Reed frogs, the market on that, I think, is just not been reached. People don't see these super colorful, I think it's diurnal, right?
Yeah. Diurnal.
Okay. Diurnal. So you can see them during the day. They're brightly colored. The reason you can see them is because they're brightly colored and they resemble a poisonous frog. One of the few frogs that's that colorful and actually has no poison in it or venom or any type of things like that. So I'm really trying to work with those. Really hard to find a reed frog in the hobby unless it's bluebacks.
Have you, I'm going to rant on reed frogs for a second. Have you bred any reed frogs?
Yeah. So right now I have successfully bred Hyperoleus marmoratus, which is the painted reed frog. I'm raising up some tadpoles of that. I bred Bolafambe reed frogs, which are known as the polka dot African reed frog, not the South American one. I've bred starry nights, bluebacks. I've got rig and back eye to produce, but my adult group didn't last long and the tadpoles just didn't come out of the water the way I wanted. So that project, I'm looking to work with those again, though. I'm hoping to get my hands on those.
Nice. Yeah.
I think as far as and then I bred these ones. They're Hyperoleus concolor.
Okay.
Ugliest reed frog. It's huge. It's a reed frog that's like 3 inches.
Weird.
Yeah, when I ordered them, I didn't know what they were. I just saw the name and I was expecting really bright, tiny, has terrible call, looks like a gray tree frog, which is cool.
Yeah.
But not what I was expecting from a reed frog.
Yeah. Yeah, reed frogs are funny because if you go, I grew up flipping through TFH pet books from the 90s. And reed frogs were always mentioned because they were coming in wild collected by the tens of thousands in the late 80s and early 90s. People weren't doing much with amphibian pets back then, except putting them in a tank till they died. And so reed frogs kind of disappeared for a while. The starry nights and the bluebacks are both from Madagascar, whereas most of the other species are from the continent of Africa. And those two Madagascan species, I don't believe there's an export quota for those anymore because of CITES. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen wild collected bluebacks or starry nights for over a decade. And there's one big frog company in the Midwest who does produce those two species, but when they don't have those two species for sale, I never see them anywhere else. So I think it's pretty important that even those more common bluebacks and starry nights, that a bunch of different hobbyists are seriously keeping those and producing them. And then that's so exciting to hear about the marmoratus, the painted reed frogs, because those are like the grail, like the quintessential.
When you think of a reed frog, that's like the one that people want to get.
And with that species, is there sexual dimorphism? Do the males and females look different?
So yes, but no. So some males will take on F phase is female. I don't know what the male phase, but there's J phase, which is juvenile, and it looks like an adult female. They retain their polka dots on the bottom. They get like orange, red on the back, very colorful. They have black stomachs. The males will turn brown, but that's not a guarantee. And then they get a zebra with red striping on
Right,
the
right.
and then when they have this ability to change colors. I think all reed frogs can do it, depending on what lighting and what kind of environment you keep them in.
Yep.
So they'll fluctuate from black and red to blue, red, and white. I'll see if, I don't know if you can upload photos on here, but maybe I could send you a couple photos of
Yeah,
what
I can put some
photo.
I'll put a bunch of different photos up in the podcast as we're talking about different stuff. Yep.
But yeah, and then it's cool though, because between different reed frog species, they breed differently. So a Madagascan reed frog from my knowledge, will typically lay eggs in the water, and engage in amplexus, and will go down into the water and do their business. My Hyperoleus marmoratus does the same thing. And that's not been my typical experience with Hyperoleus species. My other ones, which are Hyperoleus, Mitchellii, I bred those. And the lime green reeds, I forgot I bred those too. They all lay eggs above the water, and they're on, most of the time you'll find leaves. I think that's what it would be in the wild, but sometimes they'll do it on the glass. And they're all fertilized out there. They develop out of water, and then they drop in. Typically you have to, like a mantella, you got to spray the eggs and get them to hatch into the the area that you want to get them to.
That's fun. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe I think the fact that like a lot of different tree frogs change colors. A lot of like North American tree frogs change colors throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the years or whatever. Reed frogs do too. It's sort of like that crested geckos fire up and fire down. Reed frogs can do the same thing. And so sometimes when you look in a book or you look on Instagram, people are only posting pictures of like the best fired up reed frog with all the bright colors. And then they probably drag the saturation bar way down to really get clicks on Instagram. And so you're like, yeah, I want to keep those. And then you see them at a reptile expo, or you get them in the mail, and they're a bit more dull than you were hoping for. They're not like poison dart frogs where they're just vibrant, bright all the time. I mean, maybe people lose interest in them, but I think they're a great frog for people to stay committed to. Correct me if I'm wrong, reed frog adults are probably too big for fruit flies, and so need like really small crickets as their staple diet?
No, so I mean, staple, yeah. I do offer 1 week crickets to most of my reed frog species, but I do feed fruit flies regularly. I feel like that gives them a little bit more something. It's harder for them to hunt and engage in some type of activity for them. It's also different gut load that I use between my fruit flies, and I don't produce my own crickets, so I don't know what's gut loaded in them. I just offer my crickets lettuce and carrots.
Yeah.
So I think that it may add like a little bit of a different nutritional value, and I'm not necessarily going for the protein in the fruit fly, which is minimal. I'm going more for like what they're eating.
Right on. Cool. How would you how do you set up an enclosure for reed frogs? What do you like to use?
I have a take where on babies, I don't like having them in water setups. It's not, I feel like they're prone to drowning.
Okay.
That's the thing for them. So for babies, I'll have them on kind of a leaf floor, lots of moss. I'll put a small water bowl these things will hop out of the tank really easily when they're young. And they get more territorial and want to stay in their tank as they get older. But put a water bowl where I can easily access it in the tank. You don't want to put it all the way in the far back, reach in, and you'll have 30 frogs all over your arms. And hopefully in the tank and not out. There are lots of places to climb. When they hunt, you can see them and they're very active, but they do like to stay underneath leaves when they're hanging out. They're not so bold. So you want to have access to hiding, and make sure that when you're if you are going to put in like trees and stuff like that, you don't have any sharp edges. A lot of amphibians, different skin texture than a gecko. They're super, super delicate. Sharp objects are not their friends.
Right. Cool.
And then access to clean water for any amphibian is always the key to success. If you're leaving dirty water in there, those frogs will not grow out correctly, or your adults will develop some type of issue. That applies to newts too.
Yeah. Tree frog and toad Water dishes, that's a daily chore. Frog keepers out there, don't skip it. Dump it out, wash it clean, and put in a new one and fill it with fresh, clean water every day for sure to keep up on good husbandry.
Oh, the adults, I forgot to say that.
Yeah, how do you set up adults?
So for adults, those do really well in water. That reed frog is a frog that's on a reed, which is almost like a horsetail looking type of plant above like a field of water.
Right.
And so how I set them up is typically a water bottom. I usually have a raised land area so that it's not so close to the water. I'll build a ridge so that there's no soil or stuff that will fall into the water area. Decent sized land area, but lots of stuff to climb. They will hunt on all that land area. I make sure that the crickets and stuff that fall into the water, either the tadpoles in the tank will eat or we clean them up. I feel like the Madagascan species does well in a little bit cooler temps.
Okay.
And then the African species. The Africans, they go through high drought periods. So I've been able to keep these frogs out of water with no spraying and to kind of provide a cycle like they would in the wild, and put them at 85-degree temperatures, and they still eat. They do fine. I do have a small area for a water bowl, but
yep,
unlike the Madagascan species, they need access to water the entire time. So just make sure that when you invest in a reed frog that you're providing the right environment for them.
Yeah, when you think about where they're living in the wild, like you mentioned, they're in tropical Africa on grass-like plants in the bright beating sun. So you mentioned 85 degrees is fine. That's on the warmer side for a lot of frogs that we keep in captivity. Do you use a basking light or UV or anything like that? Because they're a frog that can clearly tolerate hot sun.
Yeah, so my whole lighting for reed frogs is strictly a UV light and then heat lamps.
Cool. Okay.
Other than Madagascar. So
yep,
for all the Hyperolia species, it's a heat lamp on one side of the tank to provide a temperature gradient, but what they're usually used to. The bottom other side of the tank, there will just be a UV light going through the top. And so they get access to UVB the entire time. They're given the opportunity to go into bask, but they also can hang out at the bottom of the tank, soak up in water, and then go. There's always a little crevice or something for them. So they like to go hide too. You got to provide that. You want to make sure your frogs are not stressed out. That's the key to success with all of our animals at any time.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite topics is enclosure size. And when I think about reed frogs, a lot of species are pretty small, like 1 1/4 inch to 1 1/2 inch. So it's like a tiny, brightly colored tree frog, and you might be tempted to think to yourself, I can put this in a pretty small tank. Like I can have a nice planted vivarium with either water on the bottom or terrestrial with a water dish. But anyone thinking about setting up reed frogs, you might want to think twice, because if you choose like a 12 by 12 by 18, you might have a hard time having any sort of temperature gradient. Even if you use like a nano heat lamp and a UV light, you're going to have to really, really monitor temperatures, and I doubt that frog will have any choice to choose a temperature gradient because it's such a small little box. So often when I talk to people about setting up new frogs or new newts, I talk about, it's not like what's the minimum size tank I can put them in. The question really is, what size enclosure do I need to provide the habitat they need? And it's not necessarily correlated to the fact that a reed frog is a tiny frog.
Yeah, so I will say that the smallest tank I have is a 24-18-24.
Yeah.
And my ideology beyond just gradients and temperature success is if you were trapped in a 1-bedroom all day long and could not leave, there would be some stress factor to that. And so I like to house my stuff in groups because these animals are colony animals. And so you can't fit 20 of them in a 12-18-12 or whatever you said, or 12 by 12 cube. You will find going too big might be an issue, but there is always a happy middle ground. And I would say the minimum for a reed frog, which I'm assuming you're getting like 5 to 6 of them, would probably be like an 18-18-24.
Sure.
And that'd probably be my minimum. You want to get more ample space. You don't want frogs that are pooping on the walls every day and fouling the water, all trying to get to a hot spot or a cool spot. They need space.
Yeah.
They can get congested.
How do you do in your adult tanks there that you have a large water bottom? How do you, just from a chore perspective of what it's like doing husbandry tasks with them, how do you keep that water clean, or how do you change that water?
So I use the father fish method. For any aquarium keeper out there, they're probably familiar with that. It's minimal water changing, more or less biological filtration and then animals like microfauna to clean up your water. So the essence of it is there's so much bacteria that could be cultured in sand to convert all your ammonia to nitrites and nitrates and so on and so forth. And so I keep a base of sand. I do add aqua soil. So there is like fertilization in the water for the plants growing, but it's underneath, it's capped by sand. I run fairy shrimp and scuds are what I find to be really, really good in my tanks for helping me clean it. And then there's plants. So these animals will eat the waste that would create a buildup that's undesired in the tank. The animals will excrete stuff, their waste, and they have a microbiome that makes the food basically essentially ready by the time the bacteria converts it, sorry. And then the plants uptake all that nutrition. And aquarium plants are good for cleaning water, but marginal plants have been the key to success. Marginal just refers to something that grows out of the water. A lot of us will use pothos, a monstera, just something that the roots can suck up everything, and there's oxygen exchange almost between the roots, which makes them just grow at a more rapid pace. And you may find it's easier to clip some pothos than it is to suck poop out of a tank every day.
Yeah, right. That's really cool. I wasn't even thinking that route. That's a whole new layer of bioactive setup to have this like semi-aquatic swamp, pond, reed area where you need to think about the aquatic environment staying clean. And it's a little bit different than just a fish aquarium too, with all that stuff you got going on in that shallow water. That's really cool. All right. Anything else about reed frogs, or else should we talk about some of the other cool tree frogs you have?
Working on getting the Mazabaku reed frog. So that's the next project that'll be on the list. Very
cool.
Golden blue. So excited about that. That's probably the last thing I got for them.
Yeah. Do you have any idea if any are going to be imported to the U.S.?
Yeah, they'd have to be. So it's the only person I've seen is a gentleman out in South Africa who's getting permits to captive breed these animals and then trying to export them. There's a little bit of paperwork issue as of recent with how things have been changing with our imports and pricing and regulations. So more loops to jump through, but that'll just mean for a bigger success when we achieve that goal.
Yeah. And when you think about the work that someone like him is putting in, if those ever do make it stateside, it sort of impresses upon people like us in the hobby that you should take up a project like that and take it very seriously, try to have some good success to sort of honor the work that he's doing. That's cool.
Yeah, there's been many keepers who solely basically establish an animal in the hobby. As of recent, there's been the veined milk frog that was never available captive bred, and I just did see it for the first time in the U.S. hobby where it was everywhere. A lot of these amphibians will lay hundreds, maybe even thousands of eggs. So as well as conservative, it could be worth your time,
Yeah. On that note, those veined milk frogs. Yeah. Hats off to the gentleman out west who bred those.
Mitch.
Yeah. I've been in this hobby long enough though that I've seen stuff like that come and go, and you're right. They breed by the thousands. And so they're on a couple different wholesale price lists right now this year, 2025. And so a hobbyist might see that and be like, oh, it's super common. It's for sale everywhere this year. I saw it it's like at different reptile expos, and I saw like 5 online vendors are listing them for sale. So that's just something super common that's here. And I won't buy, I don't want to buy those, raise them up for 2 years, captive breed them, deal with all that. But I will not be surprised if in a year or two from now, if Mitch doesn't breed them again, despite the fact that he might have just put 4,000 of them into the hobby, that species isn't like steady and secure in here. Like that species might not be available again unless someone
Been bred
else.
one time here.
Right. Unless someone else picks up the baton. Yeah.
So that's another thing to think about is you might only have one chance to buy that animal. Do your research, but don't let something as far as how common it is or what your perception of common is stopping you from getting like a really cool animal. The Hong Kong warty newts, they were 15, 20 bucks. Nobody can breed those. Those things just try to kill each other.
Yeah.
And so when people were buying those and nobody wanted them, now that they're long gone, I think Jake has been the only person to ever post them.
Right.
I've never seen someone post for sale the newts that try to kill each other and they're territorial.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty big challenge. We got to talk to him about how he manages those sometime. All right. So tell me about the two species of, are they Central American tree frogs from the genus Triprion, if I pronounced that correctly?
There's probably a million different ways to pronounce anything. I say Triprion.
Yeah, Latin's dead. No one knows how to say it.
So I have Pedicodus, and then I also have Spinosa. I think that they're different genus. I think that Spinosa should be Anotheca. They breed different. Huh. They're completely different frogs. They got bunched up sometime in the 2000s.
Yeah.
So those frogs are a tropical frog. You're not going to keep them in a California winter, or, they can't go outside where you're at. They'd freeze. They're very big.
Okay.
They get I think they're bigger than a red-eyed tree frog. Most people are familiar with that size. So bigger than an adult red-eyed tree. It is brown. Brown has always been a hard sell in the hobby. These frogs are just so weird. They're obscure. They're funny to look at. They have a duck bill. They quack like a duck. Are this little obscurity that hides. It's so scared of everything. That's its defense mechanism, is to kind of bust a turtle move. It will throw itself in a tree hollow and then seal the hollow with its face down.
So weird.
And just kind of provide so that no predators can go in there and they get a little scared or a little distracted.
Yeah.
They are very, very good hunters. I just found out for the first time that the adults will actually dive into the water and hunt tadpoles. So yeah, that's they've always been an arboreal species for me, who just goes in the water to kind of lay. So I was not expecting that, but they actually will hunt in the water. I've been feeding them crickets. I dust every time. That frog has a very high need for calcium because of the way the bone structure for at least Pedicodus grows. The frog will actually morph. It looks very much like a typical hyla when it comes out of the water.
Yep.
And then within a 3-month period, its whole face structure changes. It gets a bill, everything becomes flat. And then their colors are also show some type of dimorphism between them. The males will actually develop kind of olive green. And I feel like that happens mostly during the breeding season, though. The females are going to be larger, about a whole inch bigger. You'll see the torso size is completely different on those frogs, so it's very easy to tell a male from a female. And then the females are lighter. That's one thing I've seen, but the females have a more pronounced spotting or design, whatever you want to call it.
Weird. And where are they from? They're from like southern Mexico or Central America?
They're so Pedicodus is from the Yucatan Peninsula.
Okay.
Called the Yucatan duck-billed frog.
Yep.
It will go down to Honduras. I believe it's in Belize and Guatemala as well, but it's primarily found in the Yucatan Peninsula. For Spinosa, those are actually in Mexico.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Yep.
Yeah, so those are a little bit more north. Same kind of idea, though, a tropical rainforest frog, evergreens. They like cork a lot. That's what Spinosa is known for. So they're always on a piece of wood, hiding in a log. The Pedicodus is known for being an actual tree hollow. So they're doing that kind of a thing.
Yeah. How do you provide tree hollows in captivity?
So I will build up a wall on the back, and it's comprised of expanding foam and cork rounds and flats, and we'll build that up. I've also recently ordered from Vivarium Works. They build like custom trees made out of expanding foam, and they look very realistic. Had him design specifically the size hollow I want with cups integrated inside so that when they would fill when I did like a rain chamber or something like that. I've also, at the beginning, I would actually put wood in there and just drill holes into it.
Yeah.
Make sure you're using wood that is safe for amphibians. Some stuff leaches a lot of oils, and you got to be careful with what you're using.
Yep. They don't. Do either of those species, where do they lay their eggs? In ponds or in tree hollows or what?
So the Pedicodus will lay eggs in tree hollows in the wild. What I've experienced in captivity is I have stacked rocks building up to a land area, and then the tree hollow empties out underneath. And they will attach eggs in the water to plants, on the stones, underneath the tree hollow. And that the hollow is where I feel like most of the eggs are dumped, though.
Okay.
For the Spinosa, they lay eggs above water. And so they will attach them typically to cork. And what will happen after a rain chamber event is you'll look inside the hollow and just see all the little eggs on the cork bark. And just like the same with Mantella, you got to spray them to kind of get them to hatch. The tadpoles will develop out of water and then fall into water. The Pedicodus will morph out in about 20 to 28 days.
Whoa.
From a tadpole to a whole inch frog.
Whoa, that's fast. Yeah.
And they're huge. So they morph out. You can feed them almost 2-week crickets from the jump. They are cannibalistic. So you got to provide a very high protein diet with all the shrimp and things like that in the water. They do hunt. So that is something I think that is key to making the frog morph out. For the Spinosa, the females will lay infertile eggs for the tadpoles to eat. And other people have tried just feeding other eggs that are unfertilized and things of that nature. There's been some studies that show that they also believe it's the fecal from the adult that helps build the microbiology in the tadpoles and gives it the ability to come out of water and not have like issues. There's some frogs that when you're raising them, the limbs don't develop or things like that. That frog in particular really needs its parents. I mean, they have high parental skills.
Wow.
Almost like a dart frog,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, man, I didn't know anything about these two species. That's so cool.
They're it's different because most tree frogs just lay and leave. That's the common conception. So when you have a frog with parental skills, it's very fun to watch them engage in that. They worry about their young. They guard the nest of tadpoles, and obviously in captivity we can't see them fight off any predators that would go, but it does look like they would jump in the water to scare stuff off.
So this means that for these tree frog species, your large enclosures, the entire life cycle is happening in this enclosure until you're removing little froglets from them. You're not setting up tadpoles separately.
So for Spinosa, that would be probably acceptable.
Okay.
But all these frogs, I try to collect stuff out and hand raise.
Yeah.
But I do have more success with just bulletproof frogs coming out of the water when I vivarium raise them. I'm able to power feed more without a crash because my whole system is already balanced. The problem with that is, at least for Pedicodus, the parents will eat the tadpoles and the frogs.
Yeah.
So for those ones, I would always recommend, if you are vivarium growing them in the same tank with the adults, to pull them once you see the legs. Normal frog will give you indication it's morphing as far as popping out back legs, growing in size, and then shrinking in size. The Pedicodus is so quick that if you're not catching it when you see the back legs, you may just have a morphed frog within the next couple of days. And when our tanks are 36, 24, 36, and you have a little 1-inch frog in there, Yeah, when there's hundreds of them, it's easy to catch them. But once it gets down in numbers, they hide or, face getting eaten or some other type of just issue.
Yeah, interesting. And then for adults of this species of the casquetted tree frog, temperature and humidity, what are they like?
So I've had a low of about 67 for them. I believe they can go colder than that. Dry periods seem to be necessary to stimulate breeding. If you keep them over water, it may be a little bit difficult the entire time. Highs, this frog really likes hot temperatures. They breed in monsoons of like 85, 90-degree water.
Oh, wow.
So yeah they're very tolerant to heat. And that's why I'm not scared of running a heat lamp on them. And we'll even run a bigger bulb in there when I'm doing like a rain chamber to get that stimulation process going. Where a lot of tree frogs, once they're past the 80s, they get stressed out. They're not very active. You don't get too much going on, and that's definitely not what there's going to trigger them to breed. This frog breeds in monsoons, and then it's still super hot after the monsoons where the waters dry up really fast. So that's why the tadpoles have developed into a state where they can morph out in under a month.
Right. So cool. Where did you even... Now, I've seen these species before over the years on price lists, made available for sale, but nothing with any sort of consistency. Where did you even find these two species for you to start working with them?
So my buddy Jordan at Tree Frog Center, he did an import 2 years ago of some Triprion pedicautus. Hadn't even heard of the frog at that point, and kind of looked into it. Was like, oh, this thing is ugly, brown, and fat. I need it right now.
Nice.
And so, yeah, he worked together. He brought in, I think, 100 of them or something like that. And so we were able to get those from Europe, raise them up as babies, and then now going to be producing. I actually just raised them up for the first time, so I have my own froglets now that I'll be offering to the U.S. hobby. For Triprion spinosa, I got those from Finn's Frogs Farm and then Josh's Frogs.
Okay, they had them at some point. Interesting.
Yeah, Josh's Frogs still breeds them. I know they had like some issues, so a couple species are either not producing right now or what it is, but I have seen them up on there every couple months, maybe like one or two of them.
Interesting. With the Spinosa, how many during breeding season, how many young is a female producing?
I think it's different than the amount that gets raised up because they're trying to share eggs. Yeah. I mean, the tadpoles are so small. They're 1/8 of an inch in length. They can do several hundred tadpoles. The reason they're not so common in the hobby is because raising them up, they just don't all have the ability to eat that much. And you would almost want to section off the amount of tadpoles you're raising up to make sure that that food they need is available for them. Raising them on typical tadpole food and boiled spinach and stuff like that is not going to work for that typical species.
Gotcha. What are you feeding them as tadpoles?
So for the Spinosa, so they're an egg eating. The mother lays infertile eggs. For the pedicautus, those ones you can actually feed food. You just want to provide a high amount of calcium in the water. For the tadpoles of the Yucatan frog, that one I keep crushed coral in the tank, which Jordan from Tree Frog Center also told me about, to make sure the calcium levels are pretty decent as they're developing. Food wise, I'm doing bug bites, which is primarily black soldier fly larva, and then it has like spirulina and things of that nature in it. I'm also doing turtle food.
Okay. Yep.
If you can grow a turtle, I grow a frog.
Yeah, protein and calcium. Yep.
Yeah, there's a higher protein for the turtle to develop its shell in there, and so for those frogs where they're morphing so much, I find that to be almost necessary.
Cool. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, those are two crazy species. I feel like with that duck-billed frog, you could have an Instagram page and just dedicate it to that frog and post a picture of that ridiculous looking frog every single day and make them more popular.
It is the platypus of frogs.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, they're pretty ugly. They are brown, but there's nothing else like them.
Yeah. Their call too. That's something special about them. Very loud. And it's a bunch of ducks going off.
Cool. Where so not just with this species, but with all the amphibians that you have captive bred, where do you, over the years, where have you been selling them? Do you use a website? Do you vend expos? What do you do?
So we have a website. It's socalpawsandclaws.net. Was doing kind of shows, but had some issues where there's mites and things at shows that you cannot avoid, and people go table to table. Very worrisome once you get a very big collection going as far as what you're bringing into the room. So don't know if we're going to be doing too much of shows, but we will supply vendors at shows. And so the frogs will always be available. I do offer them to some wholesalers, so you'll probably see them on some wholesale list this year. And then I think another one that is overlooked is there's other people in the world that are looking for all these rare frogs and animals that we have. And in the United States, we're limited on what we can import, but a lot of the times we can export the stuff that we have. So that's another outlet.
Cool. Yep. Yeah, just mentioning what diseases you might bring home from a reptile expo, which is kind of a funny thing to say. Careful out there, folks. With amphibians in particular, you got to be very mindful of ranavirus and chytrid. And probably at any given reptile expo, there's a vendor or two who's just flipping a lot of wild collected stuff that's likely untested, untreated. And so you're not just worried about parasites and mites, you're also worried about viruses and fungus that can bring home and wipe out your collection. So whether you're going there shopping or going there vending, have some sort of practice for using hand sanitizer, not touching a lot of stuff, not letting the general public I would not let general public handle like actual frogs. Never mind picking up the cup, letting a million people pick up the cup and look at the frog. But I don't think anyone should be letting people take it out and touch the frog, because
even the touching the cup, that could lead to issues. There's a lot of vendors where if you touch, it's because you're going to buy it.
Yeah.
And it's for the safety of
everyone in the amphibian hobby. You got to take this seriously. You got to know how to swab and test your animals. You got to know how to quarantine them. I won't make this episode about this topic, but it's, you sort of mentioned that about reptile expos. It's something to take seriously. Chytrid is treatable, but it can do a lot of damage before you get it under control. And you're going to spend a lot of time and money getting it out of your house or out of your collection.
And sometimes if you treat a frog for it, it spreads and you'll still have to treat other things. And this stuff is the reason he's emphasizing it so much is people have literally lost whole facilities.
Right.
And their livelihoods depending on an animal and the security of an animal. And I think up until like maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was basically an uncurable disease. You can treat it over the counter now with a couple of sprays. But it's even when you can treat it, it's still a scary thing. You don't want that.
You can treat it with a spray, but to practice the biosecure protocol for going through treatment is so much work, especially if you have more than a handful of frogs. No one wants to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and as soon as you handle them, if you have other frogs to deal with, everything is susceptible to what you're trying to prevent, which is a scary thing. Yeah,
but we'll move on from that topic. Probably one day I'll do a whole episode about it. I know a few scientists who are involved in the research of BSAL and the frog chytrid. BSAL is the salamander fungus. And it'd be interesting to hear from them. But so we're just worth a mention, all you amphibian keepers out there, you need to know about this. It's like nidovirus in snake keepers. You can't ignore it. Moving on, different topic. What are your goals for the future in the amphibian hobby? What are you hoping to do next?
I think a lot of people are motivated to make money in the hobby. That's a lot of people look at it as like a side hustle and things like that. A goal would be to be more oriented into establishing species and having the best practice that we could have, so that when someone buys off of us, they're having success and the best chance of success. Just like we're doing right now, another goal would be to give out more knowledge and make sure that it's accessible to everybody. You know, I'm not, you don't see me posting like how to do this, how to breed a tree frog video. And that's because this stuff is a little hard. It's not, can't just spit on it and it breeds. At least making the information to what we have as knowledge available to everybody, so that we don't continually lose really cool animals. I remember being young and seeing every and anything was always available. It was always $15.
Right.
Not trying to go back to Kittredge or anything, but these things wipe everything out, and then you'll find the animals that you wanted, or thought were available, or just, it's not possible because of how hard it is to get those animals. And then also when you are looking to obtain stuff that's not local in your country, sometimes the paperwork is just almost unfinishable.
Yeah.
And orchestrating someone out of the country who's going to do a solid job, give you solid animals, and do solid paperwork is not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah. Talk about a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche hobby. Yeah. Someone in a foreign country who's willing to jump through legal hoops just to get you some captive bred, who knows what. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. A lot of times people don't like to talk about their future goals because they don't want to put it out there and then not achieve the goal, and sort of like have people remember that. I don't think you got to worry about that. What are like the 2 or 3 species at the top of your list that you're hoping, whether they're available or not, that you would really like to get?
The one that got away is the Madagascar rainbow rain frog.
Right.
Scaparini gotobelli.
Yep. I
would love to figure out a way to get someone to get paperwork to legally send those. I'm pretty sure they're farmed out in Madagascar pretty regularly, but there's zero quota for it. And so it would take someone of a scientific stature who is interested and willing to get special authorization. I don't know if you ever heard about the water frogs too. I saw a gentleman post them recently, and I think Cal Frogs, if you know who that is, on Instagram. Yeah. He worked on a project, and I believe it was some laboratory, to reproduce them before they had like really low endangered numbers.
What species are they?
They're the water frog, but I'm not actually sure on the species name.
From where?
It's called the Titicaca water frog of South America.
Yep.
Yeah, so
those are pretty cool. I know what you're talking about now. Yep.
They're just different.
Right. Yeah, I remember the last time those rainbow Madagascan burrowing frogs came in, and a couple people put in a pretty honest effort in establishing them with hopes of captive breeding. A lot of the imports didn't do good, and they were in the hands of some really responsible keepers, but they did not establish well. I'm not sure why, if it was food or husbandry. They might be like a termite specialist or something like that. And then I'm not aware of any captive breeding in the States from that species.
I'm not aware of any captive breeding in the world from that species of successfully like rearing from cads to frogs.
Right.
I've looked, and yeah, I've seen there's Scaparini marmoratus that someone recently just did too. So I'm hoping that if they ever get to the States, that it would be like breeding those.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, those are some good grail species to be interested in. I don't know. The rainbow frog's pretty endangered, right? That's why there's no export quota on them.
Yeah, they're so hard to find.
Yeah.
Typically, you can go on iNaturalist and look at like any animal you want, and I think there's like 2 or 3 photos.
Wow.
Of that frog. It's very hard to find.
They were, I think, was that species like a limestone, like its microclimate, microhabitat needed to involve limestone. Yeah.
Same monsoon kind of a thing. Yeah. And then everything dries up real quick. So it's probably some special care that needs to go into those frogs, which is maybe why there were not so much successes with it.
Well, with all these African rain frogs that have come in the last 2 years, those really cute, grumpy looking golf ball frogs, I really hope someone is working on those seriously and captive breeds those, because they have a pretty niche habitat where they want to be burrowed in the ground. They spend a lot of time there because of the dry season, but they sure are Instagram famous, and there's a big demand for people keeping them as pets. But I don't want to see hundreds of thousands of them taken from Africa from the wild just to be messed around with, so that people can post cute photos on Instagram until the frog,
a little squeak ball.
Yeah, and until the frog fails to thrive here. Yeah, so that'd be a big project for someone.
I feel like with any wild caught frog, that is always, unfortunately, you have less success with wild caught stuff, and you're always taking a risk.
Yeah, for sure.
Rain frogs in particular, those have been tried and true, not the best in captivity.
Right.
And then minimal people have successfully bred them as well.
Yeah.
But hopefully, it takes a special setup for those. So we may attempt it in the future, but we definitely got to get something dialed in for those specifically.
Yeah, they're quite a specialized species of animal, so you got a lot to think about when you're trying to set them up in captivity. How should people go about finding rarer amphibian species? Like we mentioned, it's like searching for a rare Pokemon card. It's kind of fun to look for stuff that's not common. And then if you find it, it's pretty cool to try to set it up and be the person that successfully breeds it. If someone's listening to this podcast and they're looking for a species to work with, how do they go about finding something rare? And how do they go about learning how to even keep it?
So we've had a lot of information given to us over the last 20, 30 years from other people's trials and success as far as how to try to keep something. There's obviously like new species that come into the hobby. And so there's never going to be a care sheet for how to breed a Vietnamese spiky horned leaf frog. There's only 6 in the whole country that have ever came. What I do is take temperature or look at data of where these countries are or where these frogs are located. Try to study where their habitat is, what type of water quality they are, temperature gradients. There's a difference in most places between a winter and a summer too, so you want to be able to replicate that. And it's typically just studying if you're working on something new and rare. And for shopping for these things, you're not going to go on the Google and type in rare frog for sale. It's a
great way to get scammed if you want to give your money away. There's some really sophisticated websites out there that look legit and have like hundreds of different reptiles and amphibians for sale, and they always pop up in the first 5 or 6. If you like search for, rainbow Madagascan burrowing frog for sale, I bet you'll find a website that says they have them and will take your money or ask you to pay with Bitcoin, and that's how you know you're getting scammed.
On that. So the rare stuff that we're looking at is going to be, I feel like, mostly through an importer.
Yeah.
Whether it's captive bred or not, if it's not here and it's not established, you're trying to get it to the States via someone else. Hopefully there's someone here that's already has a group or is breeding the stuff that you want, because if you could always bypass imports, you're going to have an animal that didn't have to sit in a box for 2 days. And if you can build a relationship with someone who is captive breeding all this weird stuff, obscurities, where the frogs are coming from, and you can talk to them about their husbandry to find out, all this success. So networking is really important as far as trying to get stuff established and get the things that you want. You don't want to order. I'm not saying this is not correct, but if you had the ability to order from someone directly that is taking care of those animals and had success enough to where they breed, which to me is the ultimate success, means they were as happy as they could be, that's going to get a lot more success to you on your bottom line than just ordering something off the internet and hoping it comes in the way you're expecting it to come in.
Right.
There are a lot of letdowns.
If you were, let's assume you find a cool frog that you want and it's coming in as a wild collected import, what would you make sure you have on hand? What would you set up to receive wild collected frogs? What sort of quarantine or treatment protocols would you want to know about?
So I'm buying a tub first thing off. It's going to have a lid on it, and that tub will get thrown away as soon as those frogs are done being treated. But I use Baytrail, Panicure, and Canaplex as my go-tos as long as the animals are not harboring any, like really bad diseases.
Those are mostly anti-parasite drugs, is that right?
So Baytrail is also a anti-bacterial, so it is for stomach infections. I believe Canaplex is too, but Canaplex I think mostly just makes things shed a lot and get it off the skin.
Yep.
The Panicure I use the fembendenzenol Panicure, which is a horse paste I administer orally to the frogs. Parasites are in every animal. They start ravaging the animal once the animal's been stressed out, not eating. So if you let them linger and the animal's not doing well, that can take an animal out.
Right.
I think that's something that is overlooked. And it's also another reason to buy captive bred because it minimizes that the chance of collecting that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Captive bred is your first choice no matter what. It just makes your life so much easier. I'm so frustrated. I always use red-eyed tree frogs as an example, because there's so many people captive breeding red-eyed tree frogs, which make great pets for someone who wants a planted vivarium and a really brightly colored frog. You should have no problem finding captive bred ones at reptile expos or online. And yet we still have thousands of wild collected red-eyed tree frogs coming in, ending up on wholesaler price lists, getting sent through the mail or to pet stores and and being flipped at reptile expos. And new people, especially feel bad for new hobbyists. They buy a beautiful red-eyed tree frog. It looks just fine at the pet store or at the reptile expo. And then, like you're describing, the stress from being moved around and shipped, that parasite load takes advantage of the frog when its immune system is sort of depressed because of the stress. And then right away, they're getting eye infections and skin infections and not eating and regurgitating their food. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, they have a dead red-eyed tree frog in their vivarium that they probably just spent $400 setting up. And it all could have been avoided if you would have just stuck with captive bred. And there's just almost no reason for that species in particular to keep coming in as wild collected.
I agree, aside from the fact that new bloodlines are needed every so often.
Right.
You don't need 1,000 of them to come in, though.
New blood needs to come in. This is true for all the reptiles and amphibians, and responsibly imported, and either get quickly, within a day or two, into the hands of a breeder who wants to establish and treat them, or the person who receives the import needs to go through treatment and a long-term establishment. And no one's going to do that because then you can't recoup your money back if you're treating hundreds of frogs. So yeah, I think small-scale importations into the hands of responsible keepers and breeders is just fine. I'm not anti-import, but I'm anti-import to just feed the demand of the pet trade. Yeah.
It's off-putting to someone for the very first time they buy an animal for it to die 2 weeks after purchase, and that's not an uncommon thing with wild-caught frogs.
Right.
I tend to have the opinion that wild-caught frogs are for establishing species, not pets.
Yeah.
They act completely different than a captive bred animal. They have issues. If you're looking to have an animal as a pet and enjoy it, make sure that you're buying healthy ones, and the way you can minimize that is buying them off someone who captive bred them. And, you are going to spend some more money. It shouldn't be hundreds of dollars more. So in the long run, it would potentially save you a lot of time and money to just spend a little bit more on an animal that's healthy.
Yep. I have 2 more questions for you before we wrap up, but I want to rewind to something you said about, moving the hobby into a side hustle, trying to make some money off of it. It's sort of inevitable because if you're keeping, you use dart frogs, for example. If you're keeping a bunch of dart frogs, you almost can't avoid but have them breed and produce tadpoles and young froglets. And so You got to do something with those, move them along, sell them to someone. And so you quickly get this idea like, okay, I could, sell these online, sell these at an expo, wholesale them, whatever, have a little business, at least have the hobby, create some hobby money for yourself. And I think that's a really good thing. And I'm going to use Alex at Frog Daddy as an example. He's working on the Pumilio project, a really ambitious effort to make sure he has multiple bloodlines of every single morph of Pumilio dart frog at his facility producing, so that the hobby can have sort of like a steady supply of these really cool frogs. And I don't think he would be able to take on that hobby out of his basement as a hobbyist who's not interested in making money. I think he's only able to take on a big serious project like that because he's operating a for-profit frog business. Mm-hmm. And the same can be true for us. I'm really into Mantella frogs, and I sort of have a passion to try to keep them going in the hobby because I've seen them come and go over the years.
They disappear, yeah. There's years where there's none.
And that's a pretty small project, and I could do that out of pocket. But when I sell some juveniles, that lets me buy more tanks, that lets me buy more adults of a different species. And so I didn't sense that you were anti-profit or anything. But having a little hobby business like has real benefits to yourself and to other people. So it's really cool. But my next question's for you. We don't share failures on social media too much for various reasons, but we sure do learn from them. I've had a lot over the years myself that I've learned from. Are there any failures in the amphibian hobby that you've experienced, and what did you learn from them?
Only buy a wild caught frog if you're willing to accept that it may die.
Okay.
That's the biggest one. And when you're buying wild caught animals, have a regiment and don't assume that everything's fine. Maintain your equipment. If you're, let's say you go out for a vacation and you come back and your room's 120 degrees because your AC started blowing hot air because you ran a AC from 25 years ago, and it's been working this whole time. There's things that are going to pop up. If you could be proactive, that's how you're going to save yourself and your animals. Another thing too is these animals are a living being, and when you do something, it should be for the benefit of them and have their intentions and their best interests come before your own. So there's species that could breed one time a year. That's it.
Yep.
And so to try to push something, and maybe not you're doing it on purpose, but out of ignorance, make sure that you're studying the animals that you get, because where you may have had, like I was talking about, reed frogs, one reed frog species already, sometimes that same information that you had success with doesn't necessarily transfer over. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure that you're making necessary adjustments, and also making sure that you can provide the correct environment and essentials that animal is going to need. There are certain times and places for everything. You should never rush into an animal. That's, I think all of us can attest to at the beginning, getting something, no tank ready, not having any idea like what the setup needs to be. And that's beginning failures. Things like that happen, but you got to keep in mind that this is an animal's life, and you can make a mistake once, but you don't want to stay on that path. You want to learn from it.
Yep. We talked a little bit about water and water quality earlier. I recently lost an adult newt after setting up some new tanks. And I was telling you how we're in a drought here in New England right now, a pretty severe one. And groundwater is really low. I work off of a well, and for 8 years at this house, my well water has served me just fine. Taking care of amphibians, both frogs and newts, like straight out of the tap. The well water's been just fine. But after I lost a newt a couple weeks ago, I just busted out the pH test strips, and the pH was 8. And usually my pH is a nice steady 7.2, and the pH was like 8.1. And I think it's because the groundwater it's like really low, something about the ground. And I have a pretty shallow well. It's not like a drilled well, it's a dug well. So the water quality coming out of the ground is different for me right now than it usually is. And I think that is what affected the newts, because they had a sudden and abrupt, move from one tank to the next where there was a full point of pH difference. And I don't know, other than pH, there might be some other water quality issues with my well water right now. And so something as simple as that you should be testing water regularly, making sure it's clean and safe. That's a lesson I just learned this week.
Yeah, sometimes animals don't acclimate the way you think that they're going to acclimate. You can, like you said, do some preventative measures to prevent that, but it's hard when we have a system going and it works,
right?
But it does show that sometimes you do just need to be on top of it. I use RO water only, but I add to it. I think RO water is just plain RO water is bad for amphibians. I don't think that it's a good thing. I throw calcium in mine and even little additives of, other minerals and things like magnesium and, stuff of that nature. I will say a gecko is a lot harder to water than an amphibian.
Right.
If you cannot maintain your water quality, you are going to unfortunately run into, people will get skin lesions on the newts, bloat. They get like cataracts, the eyes go bad, things like that. And it could be a very quick process. It's not sometimes this months long journey. Sometimes you'll just go in there and see that stuff is not correct. And it might be too late at that point, which is, it is a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still working with a multi-year occasional issue with my Kaiser eye newts. They get saprolegnia infections on the tips of their tail. And I've sent away for necropsies, and I've worked with a doctoral student at a university who's an amphibian medicine specialist. I've worked with Dr. Oz testing and treating and doing protocols and changing diets. I'm like, this is like a multi-year thing. I'm trying to get to the bottom of why this happens. Sometimes I have no answers yet. I think a bunch of anecdotal sort of reasons why it's not happening, but I can't, confidently produce and sell these animals right now because they go years with being fine, and then they occasionally, a couple of them get these infections on their tail and drop dead. So it's really frustrating.
I will say that with Neurergus species in general, that I've actually had, this might be a debatable thing right now, but I use tannins for those waters because I cannot achieve something they live in a crystal clear stream.
Right.
When they're breeding, it's just rocks, stream, it's running rainwater that came down a mountain, and there's very minimal ppm in the water. And so I have trouble achieving that other than RO, which will also harm the newts. So I use lots of magnolia leaves and things like that.
Okay.
I don't let the water get brown, but it is tinted. And that if you're having, it sounds like there's a spore attaching to the tail of the newt.
Yep.
And so the tannins will provide a barrier between the newt and the spore in the water, and that's not going to cure anything, right? Because that's just a barrier. If you're having that in the tank, it needs to be treated first, and then you could, this is not all answer, but these are things that we think about. And so if your species can tolerate tannins, that might be something to look into.
Yeah, it's for sure counterintuitive with Neurergus, but you are like the fifth Neurergus keeper who has recommended tannins, and I've tried it. It didn't work with this particular issue. Adding salt to the water has been keeping the saprolegnia at bay, because saprolegnia can't produce its spores in a saline environment. And the Neurergus can tolerate, most freshwater aquarium fish can tolerate some salt in their water, no problem. And so that has helped a lot, but it hasn't been 100%. So I'm still not like, and again, whatever's happening, the salt is simply keeping the disease vector at bay. It's not keeping the newt as healthy as the newt needs to be. There's either something that it's lacking in its skin, or it's something that it's lacking in its immune system, because saprolegnia is ick. It's in the aquarium hobby, it's just that tail fin rot that's called ick. Mm-hmm. And it's like yeast. It is everywhere on planet Earth. In every environment, in every droplet of water, there's probably Saprolegnia spores. And so it's next to impossible to eliminate the disease vector, the water fungus called Saprolegnia. But animals shouldn't just be randomly getting tail tip infections from it. And so there's something in my husbandry. The animal isn't as healthy. My Kaiseri newts aren't as healthy as they need to be or should be in order to just not be affected by this disease. So something I'm working on.
There's a method that I lost the name of it, but it essentially you use aquarium salt, and I can't remember if it's baking soda or baking powder, to achieve all the minerals and everything that you need that would come from in the wild. It's very low dosage so that the water is still clean, but
Gotcha.
it incorporates tannins, those other minerals that or cooking products
Yeah.
that I just named. And so the animals are able to absorb essentially every mineral that they would in the wild.
Is it when you're reconstituting RO water?
So it's at the first initial setup of the tank.
Okay.
And then I'll do a water change to minimize the amount that's in there, like take out half the water and so on. And then at that point, I'm topping off, waiting for those minerals to be absorbed in the tank. And I'll read ppms out over time of the water, and then re-add that same mixture every couple years. It's not something that I'm doing every single time. I am adding calcium and magnesium and a little bit of phosphates and stuff to the water when I'm adding my RO water to the tank, but I only do that big plunge of addition when I'm setting up a brand new tank.
Cool. Yeah, I'll look into it. I have a really large group of Kaiseri adults and some holdbacks and some juveniles. I'm still, successfully keeping and breeding them, but it's just regularly enough. I get these tail infections and it's a real problem. So I'm willing to experiment and try almost anything.
I feel like that's kind of common with Kaisers. People will, relatively often post pictures saying, hey, I have an issue with this new.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes people post it and it looks shiny almost. Yeah. So there's
Jake always jokes around in his infamous fauna classified ads about the crocotus near the yellow spotted newt. He calls it everyone's favorite newt to kill because they have a reputation for dropping dead. Not everyone establishes them well.
I strictly want to attest that to water quality.
I think so.
You know what I mean? Like something gets into the tank at one point that shouldn't be there. Or it could also be that we're not providing enough micro minerals, like the things that they would pull from the water.
Yep. Yeah. Who knows? We got to work on that because everyone loves those newts, but a lot of people don't have a great experience with them. All right. Any other hobby related topics, or should we talk about where people can follow you and find you?
I don't know if there's any other topics.
No other rants you want to share with the people?
Oh, I could rant on so much stuff, but don't even.
We covered a lot.
Yeah.
So, are you on social media? You mentioned you have a website. Want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook under Socal Paws N Claws. We post on fauna, on Morph Market, and we're occasionally at shows. Our website is socalpawsnclaws.net. We're primarily an online retail store, so we have no storefront at all, but happy to supply the hobby with what we can produce at our home.
Awesome. All right, people, give them a follow. If you like bizarre frogs or want to get into reed frogs and lots of other things, hit them up for some newts maybe. Thanks, Brutus, for coming on the Frograck Podcast today. People, stay tuned. Keep listening. Catch the next episode in a week. And thank you all. Good night.
Appreciate you, brother.